Why should this Protestant from New Hampshire care about what happens in the Vatican? Let's find out. Plus, there's an interesting personal angle from today's guest when it comes to the Pope. This is
The New England Take.
It's the New England Take. I'm your host, AJ Kierstead. Thank you to WKXL for picking up the show. Saturdays, 8:30 a.m. and in Concord and Manchester. Big thank you to thegranitegrok.com, as always, for picking up the show every Saturday. And Concord TV now is picking up the program too. AJ at newenglandtake.com if you have anything you want to say to the program, opinions, guest ideas, anything of that nature. Firstly, thanks to Dexter for joining today. He's a contributor here at the outlet. Welcome back.
Hi, AJ. Nice to see you.
And our guest today, I'm very excited to have Ambassador Francis Rooney. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me on.
Ambassador Francis Rooney served as the U.S. Ambassador to the Holy See from 2005 to 2008, appointed by President George W. Bush. He subsequently wrote a book about diplomacy in the United States and Holy See relationship in the global Vatican. He also served as the congressman for Florida's 19th Congressional District from 2017 to 2021. The seat currently is held by Byron Donalds. Another fascinating fun fact is that he actually has a personal relationship with the current Pope Leo XIV, dating back more than 2 decades, which we will dive into later on in the episode for sure. But let's start off with the most straightforward question. For those that are not involved with politics, geopolitics, anything involving policy or anything of that nature, why is it important for the United States to have an ambassador and a direct diplomatic relationship with the Vatican? I feel like it's important for people to really get that baseline, especially if they're not Catholic or not involved in the wonky nature of politics.
Yeah, it really has nothing to do with the church per se. It has to do with the ability of the Holy See to exert influence, particularly in diplomatic affairs where the United States and the Holy See may have common ground. You know, they have a soft power. They don't have any territory. They don't have any oil to protect. So they speak from a position of neutrality, if you will, that gives them a unique position.
Yeah, what sort of things would they have a position on, that especially for the United States? I mean, we have all sorts of relationships with countries all over the globe, but the church is also involved with many smaller nations, third world nations, things of that nature. Like, what sort of things would we want to make sure that the United States is connecting with the Holy See, and they in turn would pass off maybe to other nations?
When President Bush came over in 2007, we sat down with the Pope and talked about 16 different countries where the Holy See and the United States were conducting diplomatic outreaches to try to change some outcomes in them. And by and large, the United States and the Holy See were totally aligned where we want to get. You know, we're the only 2 sovereigns in the world that have human rights and human dignity in our foreign policy statements of principle. So we have a lot in common. You know, whether it's the Congo, and back then it was Kabila, you know, whether it's Ahmadinejad in Iran back then, you know, the Holy See could play a role as a neutral and unimpeachable voice. And sometimes we could get them to say things that were more powerful when they said it than when President Bush said it.
Dexter, do you have anything going off of that?
Well, I think one of the most interesting things that we've learned about your biography, sir, is your personal relationship in your earlier life with Pope Leo. So I would love to learn a little bit more about that. And building on that question, I mean, of course, Pope Leo is obviously a devotee of Pope Francis, who is traditionally considered to be more on the liberal branch of the Catholic Church. And there seems to be a sense that the current Pope, Pope Leo, is more middle ground or conservative. And I'm wondering if you can give us any insight, because he is almost such a mystery to us in that way.
Yeah, I think that we'll see Pope Leo strike a middle ground. He'll be a little more doctrinally oriented than Pope Francis, not to the extent of Pope Benedict, but he will also be pro-migrant, pro-human condition, worrying about the suffering of the at-risk people around the world, which was the hallmark of Pope Francis's papacy. And both of those are good, but he'll be a little less strident on either side of the issue, perhaps, than either one of those two predecessors.
So what sort of thing? Let's back up a little bit. What exactly is your relationship with Pope Leo? What is it? Where did you meet him? Like what sort of relationship did you have with him?
It's really great. You know, our kids went to an Augustinian school in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and Father Bob, now Pope Leo, West Augustinian province, and we would always have dinner and socials afterwards where, you know, my wife and I would see him and other benefactors of Cascia Hall was the name of the school. And so we got to know him pretty well. And he was always very thoughtful and judicious in his comments in the board meetings, very helpful. And then, lo and behold, a few years later, 2002, he became head of all the Augustinians. And so we did a family trip with another family from San Antonio and went over to Rome, and we happened to see him when he was head of the Augustinians, and he took us around. And then 3 years later, we moved to Rome. I became ambassador, and Kathleen and I had dinner with him the third night we were in Rome. And we saw a lot of him for 3 years. We invited him to everything we did that involved Americans at our residence. And I went up and did a lot of Augustinian events at Cascia, which is the home of the Augustinians, St. Rita of Cascia, and all around Italy with Cardinal Prevost, or now Pope Leo.
What's he like as a guy? I mean, that's the really neat thing about it being an American. Americans are known for their personality, to a detriment sometimes, for sure. But what's he like as a person, especially a mix of what's he like professionally when he's in these roles, where he's in these leadership roles, and outside of it as a person?
I think he's very judicious and calm, thoughtful. I think there'll be a stability that maybe was lacking under Pope Francis a little bit here. Totally American. I mean, he speaks so plainly and clearly. I think that's going to be a great thing for the church to have American diction and prose, clear thinking. You know, for example, we have a friend, Jim Farley, who's CEO of Ford. And he called me after the Pope got picked. And he said, I'd like to give him a Ford Expedition that we make in Chicago, the last Ford that we make in Chicago, in the United States. Or in Chicago. And so I went through an intermediary to find the Pope and get an email back from the Pope. Yeah, can I sell it? Can I pick the color, et cetera, et cetera? And he spec'd it out, and he's going to be driving around in a Ford Expedition now.
America,
great,
love it.
Yeah.
One of the things that's always struck me about Pope Leo, shortly after his election, and I think you're probably the right man to ask about this, having served as an ambassador and a member of Congress, but an ambassador to the Holy See, has very much seemed interested in a reunion between the Eastern and the Western churches. And you know, he's just returned from a lengthy trip to Turkey, where he engaged very deeply with the patriarch of the Eastern Orthodox Church. I'm wondering, as an ambassador, do you have a sense if that's a reunion he can achieve? Because it seems close to his heart.
Yes, I do. I think that Pope Francis made some outreaches to the Orthodox leaders, and it's an important thing for the Roman Catholic Church to do. We have enough challenges to religion right now without being separated from our brethren from the East. And that was a real victory, the way he prayed with the patriarchs in Turkey. Also a victory that he didn't pray with the imams.
Yeah, it's something very, very important. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I think he played it right down the middle. And we have a lot to gain from relationships with the Orthodox Church. And again, Pope Francis made some great outreaches there, but I think that Pope Leo has made it clear that he's going to be bridging that gap as well.
And you think playing it down the middle, that seems to be his style overall, I think you're saying, right?
Yeah, I think that he can thread the needle between how far to go and going too far.
Yeah, I mean, I think that'd be a good transition to talk a little bit about your book, the Global Vatican, an inside look at the Catholic Church, world politics, and the extraordinary relationship between the United States and the Holy See. Give a quick description of the book and what you're hoping to get across with that.
Well, I wrote the book because I felt that a lot of people didn't realize really why we would have a mission to the Holy See and what the Holy See's role can be in the world. In fact, I did a talk one time after we got back from Rome, and a Presbyterian guy came up to me and said, I had no idea the Catholics did all that stuff. I thought, wow, I'm going to write a book. And the book talks about the role that the Holy See's played in the world over years, centuries, and the long-term relationship with the United States. There's a part in the book where I mention about, I think it was Ben Franklin, maybe it was Jefferson, asked Doria Pamphili, the papal nuncio or ambassador to France, who they would like us to pick to be the nuncio or the ambassador for the Holy See. And Ben Franklin said, pick anybody you want. We have separation of church and state. You guys pick your nuncio to come to the United States, not us. And that says a lot about the role of the First Amendment in the United States and how sharp that was, even right in the beginning.
And the nature of religion has been a tremendous, especially over the last 150 years, it's been a tremendous changes when it comes to the nature of religion and government. You talk about the founding of the United States, obviously, with its very secular way the Constitution is set up. So it allows religion, but it allows people not to necessarily be following religion. But you figure, especially coming into the nature of rise of socialism and communism in many countries, it's just, people forget, like they did not like the Catholics. That was a tremendous issue with the nature of these governments rising. And the church has survived through that and still maintain relationships with the United States and things like that to make sure that people are still able to worship the way they see fit around the world, which is incredible.
Yeah, one time I was talking with Pope Benedict and we got talking about the First Amendment. He said, it would have been great if Europe had a First Amendment, separation of church and state, because it's still very complicated in Italy. It's very complicated in Italy. There's always church this, church that, federal Italy government money, etc. Germany's the same way. It's very complicated.
And the chaos in Great Britain, I mean, the IRA and everything of that nature, like it doesn't even, you don't even have to look very far back.
Yeah.
And I wonder too, I think it raises a good question. Because the Pope is no longer a temporal ruler, there's no longer a papal states, do you think that we'll continue to have an ambassador to the Holy See going forward? Or does it start to wade into First Amendment questions that might become harder to answer when the Pope's no longer a prince of a state?
Well, remember, we never had a relationship with the Holy See while the Pope had property. Our relationship with the Holy See began under Ronald Reagan. Now, predecessors, going back to FDR, tried to start an embassy, but the anti-Catholic prejudice impeded it. And it took Reagan and the threat of communism to create the case to create an ambassador to the Holy See. And I think that we'll have one because it transcends any current event, okay? It's about the ability of the Holy See to speak on the world stage about issues that affect America and help our diplomacy.
So can you speak to how Pope Leo has done so far in his role since becoming the Pope in May? What are some things that you think have stood out that people should pay attention to?
Well, first of all, I thought he came out of the box really strongly with the Jumbotron Youth Day Mass and session at White Sox Park. What a great way for an American Pope to put his feet down, but do something at White Sox Park, especially after all the controversies about was he a Cubs or White Sox fan? Only in Chicago would that happen. But so he came out of the box strong. I think that he laid out some relationships with the Orthodox. He carved out some turf with the imams. He went to Lebanon and called for peace and said, please don't leave your country. Stay in your country and work for peace there. I thought that was a very profound thing that the Pope said.
Yeah, immigration is a huge issue. Yeah, I mean, how has he spoken about the whole immigration situation, especially it's been such a hot button issue under the Trump administration?
Yeah. Well, he came out right away calling for humane treatment of migrants and not sending back migrants that don't have criminal records, and continuing the line of Pope Francis there. And I think most Catholics would agree with that. Well, first of all, anybody who's an employer in the United States knows that we need those immigrants to come work here. We don't have enough workers. So let's get the ones that don't have a criminal record, that have families, that want to work here and be here for the long run. What's the problem with that?
Dexter?
Oh, sorry about that. So, Ambassador, I just kind of had one final question, because I think this has done quite a lot to help to paint the picture of what Pope Leo, or rather how Pope Leo will approach his governance of the church. One of just the last questions I have outstanding, sir, is what can we expect of you? Obviously, Byron Donalds has resumed your seat in the House, but is now running for governor. You've written, of course, in the past. Are you preparing to write? Are you preparing perhaps a future again in office?
I think for me, the best thing to do is to write and to wait and see how this thing with Trump unfolds. The Republican Party is in an odd place right now. And there are people like me, what I would call a Reagan-Bush Republican, a Glenn Youngkin Republican, that are out here perhaps at odds with some of the more hardcore of the Trump people. And let's see how it all evolves. I don't know where it's going to go.
And you'd see yourself more as an advocate then for the traditional norms, let's say, of the Republican Party.
Oh, absolutely. I'm a multilateralist. I don't believe that carving the world up in little discrete blocks is going to help solve anything. It didn't work before World War I, and I don't think it'll work now.
I was wondering if, going off of that, I'm wondering how much you paid attention to what went on with Turning Point USA's AmFest over the weekend. 'Cause I feel like there's a lot more voices beginning to pop up that match what you're saying. I mean, Ben Shapiro, the whole Israel thing aside, I've talked about Israel enough. I don't want to talk about Israel. But the nature of American politics seems to be there's a lot more people wanting to go back to that George W. Bush and before days of the Republican Party. Do you think that it will go that way? What are the possibility you think of that?
Well, I'm hopeful. And usually there's a yin and a yang, and we've had a real yin towards this extremism of republicanism that I don't know is really suitable for most people. And we'll see where it comes back. I mean, there are a lot of really good people out there that don't necessarily agree with all the things that the Trump administration is doing, but they're very conservative Republican people. We'll see where that goes.
I regret to say that I'm a bit of the yin, but it was an absolute pleasure to meet you and to talk about the Pope.
And I gotta say, personally, as someone who leans more libertarian, I really feel like there's been a big libertarian push in the Republican Party, kind of shifting more into specifically in less government and less focus on the values side of it. Do you foresee that being a big contention with the more traditional conservatives, or can they maybe find a way to kind of work together a little more than they did?
Well,
back in the
everything
day?
seems to be kind of topsy-turvy right now. I mean, here you have Trump coming out for collective bargaining. You have excessive spending on both Democrats and Republicans, including Trump. The traditional Republican values of limited government, support of free enterprise. I mean, who would have ever thought we would be taking government stakes in companies? I mean, that's like what they do in Singapore and Saudi Arabia. Never here. There's a lot of very strange things going on that I personally don't agree with.
Cool. All right. So if people want to check out your book, where should they go? Do you have a place where people can check it out?
Well, everybody sells their books on Amazon. That's
yeah.
the go-to place for books.
Awesome. Ambassador Francis Rooney, I really appreciate you joining us today for this conversation. It was really fascinating to hear the relationship between the United States, the Pope, and the Church overall, and a little politics in the mix. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me on.
All right, that was a great interview with Ambassador Rooney. Be sure to check out the recording if you missed that on the YouTube channel as well as on the podcast feeds. Substack.com, I forgot to mention that at the beginning. We're over there. NewEnglandTake.com takes you right to the Substack if you want the episodes in your inbox. So we've talked about previously on the show, we're fans of Carl Benjamin. He runs podcast The Lotus Eaters, which is a British conservative outlet that he's got. They talk history, news, culture, all sorts of different things. I listen to it every day. Carl is former. The way he used to YouTube handle was Sargon of Akkad, and he's been posting over there again. But he's been really diving into. He went from back in the Gamergate days as being a kind of liberal, conservative-leaning guy, kind of classical liberal, he would call it, in the Dave Rubin sense of the word that basically destroyed it because Dave Rubin's a psychopath who just wants to make money. But he's been bringing up this interesting thing that I wanted to talk about with you, Dexter, where it's he thinks liberalism is dead, or if it's not dead, it should be dead. And by liberalism, we mean the big global nature of the word, where it's everyone's opinion has value and they should all be brought to the table, and that's how we should make up our politics nowadays. And he makes the case that we need to destroy that if we want the West to survive what's happening now with the nature of global mass migration, the progressive left, and their blatant nowadays socialist push that they want to push our governments into nowadays, that it's dead. And he said that the opposite to that is relationships. You have your ideology, you have your things you're bringing to the table from policy and ideals and things of that nature, but it's about relationships, in that, hey, that crazy person over there to the right of me that maybe I don't agree with everything on, but we need to have a relationship with him in order to make sure that we don't lose out on our country and our conservative values and our ability to exist as a free country. That goes for Britain as much as it goes for the United States, in my opinion. And I thought it made a lot of sense. I don't know how much of that made sense with me summarizing it super quickly.
Well, I'll just say up front that I'm happy for him that in the United Kingdom as it exists today, he's allowed to say anything at all that is not the British orthodoxy in terms of what the government's willing to accept. What I take a little bit of issue with, and I think, well, or at least it's worth asking, is if relationships and sort of macro or micro society, rather, is the answer to the vacuum that will be left by getting rid of liberal egalitarianism. It doesn't completely follow for me, because if you remove egalitarian liberal principles from the nature of government, or the form of government that we have, what almost necessarily has to be left is a form of totalitarianism. I mean, again, relationships and family and everything being the substitute sounds nice, but in fact, when you are trying to remove liberalism from political discourse, what you have to do is proactively remove certain voices, even the voices that we might find detestable or annoying. So I don't know, it doesn't strike me as a practical answer for how you get the liberalism out of our forms of government, both here and in the UK.
Yeah, and I don't know if I made it clear. He's English. That's where he's based out of. And there's something, like, I listen to their show regularly, and something that I keep having to to get across? Where is it a matter of the way the United States has its government and culture set up with who an American is versus who a British person is? Are very different with the nature of that, and maybe that makes sense for their parliamentarian system, where they need to have these kind of relationships across multiple parties that kind of peripherally get along, like Reform and
but
Conservatives.
A liberal form of government necessarily admits of all voices, even kooky ones, and you've just got to figure, kind of with the rolling on of time, there will be kooks, and in order to excise that from government, in order to excise the crazies, what do? Do you put an IQ test on the plate? You can't do that. Every
He
measure
literally would.
that would
I want to make that
that.
clear. Yes, he does.
You would in fact have to do that. But again, every measure that would serve to excise liberalism from the form of government is, in effect, a totalitarian measure, or fascist, or sort of despotic measure, because you are choosing characteristics by which to remove someone from the electorate or the political class. I'm not saying that that's the worst thing that could possibly happen, but the question is, how do you achieve it in a way that doesn't run so much afoul of our fundamental principles?
Kind of goes back to, we spoke a couple weeks ago about the nature of the media, and hey, is this fracturing that we have natural and healthy, and is this the way it should be, where right now we're having this alleged polarization where people want to say no to everything, and is this just, are we going in the right direction? Because now everyone's kind of had the chance to air out their grievances and get out there, and maybe now we can begin to, it's like, I'm hopeful for the American political system where we can kind of rebound and be able to start going behind politicians that aren't just out for themselves, as many of the, unfortunately, especially after talking to Ambassador Rooney, the boomers that are in office. Maybe we start turning it around because of us being able to get all the crazies in the room and say, you're a little too crazy, but we can agree on this other thing.
But you bring up a good point even there. It's not even necessarily bad or crazy ideas coming in. Sometimes it's old ideas. It's almost the opposite of new waves of thought coming in. It's old waves that are hanging on. And again, I don't know what the clean measure would be that would take that out of our system of government, other than something very drastic, like an IQ test or a property ownership test, or something that is very aggressive and difficult for the American people, or the people of the UK, I assume, to accept. In a parliamentarian system or a Republican system like ours, I don't see there being a clean measure to remove either old or bad ideas or both.
It is absolutely hilarious to me that you literally brought up all the ideas that the podcast The Lotus Eaters has been bringing up, where it's voting by property and household voting and...
Because how many options are there?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean,
and that's
there's
not
only a few
sustainable.
ways to... Yeah, you can't. Some of it's been done, and we've rejected it. Again, bring it back, though. I don't think you'll find an overwhelming popular support for a sort of regression of the system that any of those things would involve. Gender was one of our biggest limiters on voting for years and years. I'm sure they proposed that too. Again, find the support for that. You won't.
Yeah, no, that's not going to pass even by the most staunch conservative, because you got to read the room. There's 320 million of us in this country. We all have equal voting rights. So it goes by, if you're over 18 and you can prove you live here, you're able to vote. Especially in New Hampshire, because we have voting ID that just got approved again. Yay! Thanks, courts. You actually did your job. I appreciate it. All right, Dexter Charbox, thank you so much for joining me this week.
Great to see you.
All right, NewEnglandTech.com if you want the episodes in your inbox every week. Trying to build that up. I had an article on there that I posted last week because I was dying of norovirus or something terrible, so I was not able to record. That's the reason why I missed a week. I am recovered. On political seriousness, I'll try and put it in the episode description. Kind of looks at the Mamdani Trump visit and why we shouldn't take politicians seriously, but That's fine. Don't worry about it so much. It's okay. The world's on fire, but it's all right. Big thank you to WKXL for picking up the show. Saturdays, 8:30 a.m. Next up is Facing the Future, brought to them by the Conquer Coalition. Big thank you to thegraniterock.com for picking up the show, and we'll talk to you soon.